Lead in cinnamon, an overview. The more things change, the more they stay the same. This week's Food Safety Roundup has yet another notice for lead in cinnamon. That's another recall notice even. That's the 10th brand mentioned in recalls and alerts this year. Why are we finding so much cinnamon with elevated levels of lead? Because we're looking for it in the wake of the USA's Wanabana cinnamon applesauce puree scandal of late 2023. In the case of Wanabana, the lead was almost certainly added deliberately to the cinnamon in the form of lead chromate, an industrial textile colorant for food fraud purposes. Better coloured cinnamon appears better quality and can be sold for a higher price. The concentration of lead in the cinnamon used in the Wanabana applesauce was between 2,000 and 5,000 parts per million, more than 2,000 times higher than the safety limit of 2.5 parts per million proposed for cinnamon by the United Nations Codex Alimentarius Commission. The Wanabana incident is unlikely to be a one-off. Last decade, a sample of cinnamon tested during lead poisoning investigations by the New York City Department of Health also contained exceptionally high concentrations of lead, 880 ppm. Such levels are likely to be the result of deliberate adulteration with a lead-containing substance. The recent recalls for lead in cinnamon are more likely to be due to accidental contamination than food fraud because the levels are much lower. For example, lead concentrations for products recalled in March were in the range of 2 to 3 parts per million, which is 1,000 times lower than the cinnamon in the Wanabana products. Another brand, which was the subject of a health alert in July, contained 20 ppm, which is 100 times lower than the Wanabana cinnamon, although still a whole order of magnitude higher than proposed safety limits. Lead chromate has a long history as an adulterant in turmeric and has also been found in ground cumin. Another lead-containing colorant, lead oxide, has also been used to fraudulently adulterate spice. Paprika adulterated with lead oxide caused mass lead poisoning in consumers in Hungary in the mid-1990s. When it comes to intentional contamination with lead, spices can be affected through environmental contamination, such as from soil, water, and airborne dust, and by cross-contact with lead-containing materials during process, transport, and storage. Surveys of cinnamon products in households and retail stores in the United States typically find levels in the range of 2 to 3 parts per million. Takeaways for food professionals. Lead is a known food safety hazard in cinnamon. Lead is a known food fraud hazard in cinnamon due to a history of deliberate adulteration with lead-containing materials such as lead chromate, and this hazard should be considered during food fraud vulnerability assessments. If your company purchases powdered spices, heavy metal specification limits and analyses are recommended. And I've got a link to some further reading, which is called A Spoonful of Lead, a 10-year look at spices as a potential source of lead exposure. That was published in 2019, and there's a link to that, of course, in the email and the post. And by the way, if you're loving this newsletter and this podcast, please do share it with your friends and colleagues, because more shares help keep this publication independent and thriving.